Welcome back to Your Story Medicine. Today, I am with Charlotte James of the Ancestor Project. Charlotte has been a harm reductionist and psychedelic explorer for over 10 years, but her path through this work has certainly not been linear. After leaving harm reduction years ago because of rapid burnout, she is returning to this work with a new energy, thanks to the power and healing of sacred earth medicine. Hi, Charlotte.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I feel like saying hi, teacher. It's so wonderful to be in community with you. My connection to the Ancestor Project began with a meme that was floating around, and I remember thinking to myself, I really resonate with this, but do I share it? Do I not share it? Am I going to get in trouble? And I think that speaks so much to the stigmas that we still carry when it comes to earth medicine. And I'm going to read what the meme is. This
I
is
was going to say, what
posted
does this
on,
mean?
yeah, it was posted on December 30th, 2020 to 2021. The CDC now recommends a mushroom ritual and a walk in nature so you can unplug from what the CDC says. Slide 2. The CDC now recommends talking with your ancestors so you know that they got you way more than the CDC does. I'm gonna be honest, I shared it and then I deleted it because I was like, girl, do not open up that wormhole. But this post got almost 10,000 likes, so obviously it did push some buttons, and it made me realize that, oh my goodness, like even seeing some of my friends that are liking it. Oh, you wait, do you partake, or you think that it's
Mm-hmm.
funny? Which then led me to your website, which then led me to the waiting list of the Psychedelic Liberation Training Program, which then made me realize that this is more than just a moment, but an actual movement that's being created, that's not just being created by you, but is a continuation that precedes beyond the 500 years of racism as we know it here on Turtle Island. And so I went through that 10-week training with a curiosity, because y'all may not know this, and it even feels weird for me to say it, but plant medicine has been so integral in my own journey these past several years. And we have our certain perceptions of people who partake, and I don't want to be associated with them. Right. So finding your partner, and your work has just been one of those moments of divine synchronicity and affirmation that I am on path. And I feel anybody who comes across your work is also affirmed of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a really beautiful reflection. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to dig into what the heck this even means, psychedelic liberation and using plant medicine for collective healing. But before we go into that, touching base with the human behind the healer that you are, what is it that you're celebrating about yourself today?
Ooh, I love that question. Well, I was telling you before we started the recording, I just came out of the jungle. So it was my first time traveling back to really sit in medicine, in community, in tradition that is steeped in 1,000+ years of learning and of interaction and engagement with the realm beyond the invisible world. And it was also like the first time camping for 10 straight days and like sleeping on the ground with no electricity and bathing in a river. And so I am really proud that I just made it through that aspect of it, like the strength to disconnect from this realm, what I'm very used to and accustomed to as a Western acculturated human, and sat in, I think 6 nights of deep ceremony, probably purged, I don't know, over 20 times in those 6 nights. So I'm just proud to have be listening to the ancestors and following that path with less and less resistance each time.
How much purging until we are fully liberated?
It's a great question. I'm a huge fan of purging, which I think is also sometimes a challenge where I'm like, oh, I don't need to hold this medicine more. I could just purge. So, and, you know, shifting our understanding, I think we're all frequently we grow up in cultures or settings where purging or vomiting is seen as sickness, as opposed to it being seen as a form of getting well, of being able to like release and let go of the things that our body is holding, that our bodies have been holding for generations. So I think it'll probably take a decent amount of purging to get us to liberation.
Lifetimes.
Lifetimes.
I actually, you know what, when that meme came up, that was the same week I had just came back from excuse me, from Tulum, and I had my first combo ceremony.
Oh,
And so
nice.
I mean, I experienced a little taste of the purge, and I just remember when I was in that moment thinking to myself, oh my God, why does liberation hurt? What, this feels like masochism. Why am I torturing myself to heal? And I'm like, I'm never doing this again. This is terrible. Why are people into this? And then like a week after I came back, I was like, all right, what else is asking to be released? And then of course, look at the doors that I opened to me because I now am just on this path of wanting to seek a deeper understanding as to what you were saying, like the ways we have been conditioned to see purging as something that's bad, or even our connection, our relationship to earth medicine, which brings me to this question. How would you describe your medicine?
Mm. So it's funny that you mentioned combo. Combo is such a path opener and was so key in me also coming back to my purpose and having the strength to step into this work and start to build community with the Ancestor Project. But I think it's also important to think beyond just like what is the literal medicine that you work with, but what is the medicine that your spirit carries in. And for me, I would say I bring mountain energy. So like strong, stable, grounded energy, and eye of the storm energy and medicine. So when things are chaotic around me, I'm able to really stay in my center, and that takes a lot of practices and coming back to the center regularly. But that was those two pieces became really clear in the jungle for me, that those are two things that I can offer to the collective, especially in the really challenging moments of ceremony, is to stay in this grounded, centered place amongst the chaos.
Do you feel like that is something that has come naturally to you throughout your life, or that's something that you had to learn?
A lot of my early childhood experiences, I think, contributed to that. I had, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was really struggling to connect to other people's sense of uncenteredness and lonely and deep loneliness in what was happening in the world. And I had a journey where I saw myself as a child, like sitting within that chaos, that my home had a lot of loud, aggressive energy in it, growing up before my parents got divorced. And I'm an only child. And so for a long time, I really did have to, and very early on, I had to learn to hold myself amongst that chaos, amongst the lack of emotional or spiritual maturity around me. And for good or for worse, it made me really sort of self-sufficient in that. And so I think for a long time, it made it so I didn't ask for help, which is like the for worse part. And now that I have asked for help and I have, moved through parts of my healing journey, I can sort of cultivate that energy for the collective good.
Yes, I find that those of us who actually have a challenging time with receiving help end up being in professions where we give a whole lot of it.
Oh, 1,000%, 1,000%. It's like service as a distraction.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
service
And
to others as a distraction.
and so the Ancestor Project, obviously, like that name, first of all, is something that I'm so resonant with, and another affirmation, because this has been so much of my curiosity these past several years of what does it even mean to connect with our ancestors? I mean, I did a whole TED talk about it, and all the nerves were coming up for me because I'm like, I don't want people to think that I'm the gatekeeper or I'm the channeler or the medium to connect people back to their ancestors, especially growing up in the United States here on occupied land, where so many people don't know where it is their ancestors are from. How is it that we can even begin to make those connections? And so, beginning with your own journey, you talked a little bit about your childhood upbringing, but when people ask where your ancestors are from, what would you say? And how has this influenced the path that you're on today?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I agree. I think for a long time, I saw people talking about ancestral healing as this thing that was very distant, and you had to have like whatever skill set or gift or XYZ process to make that connection. And the really beautiful thing about sacred earth medicine is that it makes you the channel, like it is your direct connection back to your ancestors, both human ancestors and non-human. That we were talking a little bit before the recording about the prayer that we speak before all of our classes and ceremonies, and this remembering of the two-legged and the four-legged and the tree people and the rock people and the plant people and the insect people. Like all of these beings around us are our ancestors. The rocks are our oldest ancestors, and really remembering that as a pillar of really like all ancestral traditions, right? Is that like our ancestors practiced these animist traditions in which they saw all beings as having and giving life. My ancestry on my father's side is Western Africa by way of Jamaica. So, obviously we made it through. I mean, we made it to Jamaica via enslavement, so not super optional. So I feel really deeply connected to that lineage, to the lineage of the African diaspora, Jamaica, what is present day Ghana, the Akan people, the Twi people. And then on my mom's side, I am of predominantly Germanic lineage, so the Saxon people, which has been really interesting for me. People will ask, if I connect with and honor both sides of my ancestry? And my answer is always yes, because I think it would be really inauthentic to not. And there's sort of like, there's trauma Olympics that's happening where people are constantly trying to like one up each other in trauma. And then I think there's also kind of lineage Olympics of like, oh, I'm more legit because I have XYZ lineage, and that's a massive trap. The reality is that we all come from, at one point, indigenous animist traditions that lived in harmony and deep relationship with the earth, with the regions that we were from. If you go far enough back, especially into like hunter-gatherer times, and pre-massive colonization, most traditions were also working with some type of sacred earth medicine or entheogen to connect with the land, to connect with the spirit realm and what is invisible to us in our waking state. And so a lot of the work that I want to call in is around all of us, whether we consider ourselves currently, people of color or BIPOC or whatever other identity marker we want to put on our lineage, that when we go far enough back, we have much more that connects us than that separates us, and trying to come back to that memory.
I think the challenge with that is then skipping all the steps that it takes to get to this point of truly understanding that we are all one, that we are all interdependent. And I know that this is what will turn off many people who are just diving into earth medicine. And maybe people listening can relate to this, because when I think about psychedelics, I have this image in my mind of like white hippies in the 70s and like music festivals, which that's oftentimes where people will consume. And I went to one music festival because people were like, oh my gosh, June, you should check this out. This is so your vibe. And when I got there, I was like, I'm offended that you guys think that this is my vibe. And not only that, but I had yet to cultivate this relationship with psilocybin. And I just remember like there was an integration tent, but it was like it didn't feel good. The environment didn't feel conducive. It was more using plant medicine as a means of escapism versus an invitation to dive deeper into our inner world. And so that's what I see a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say this, because my introduction to the world of psychedelics was through the rave scene and like burner adjacent events. And I was frequently the only or one of very few non-white people in those spaces. At the same time, I am coming to a place in my path where I am not feeling like all of the labels that we're using for identity are actually serving us. And I totally agree and honor that there are many steps that we need to take to come back into this place of community. We don't want to like spiritually bypass our way through it and be like, oh, but in the 5D, we're all one being. That's fine and true. In the 3D, we have a bunch of constructs that we've all bought into for the last 400 years. So we can't really just be like, when I go off with the mushrooms and now I'm just like a divine being. Beautiful, true, super healing, especially for, I think, Black and Brown folks and Indigenous folks who have been told for generations that we're not sacred, right? And treated in a way that we are not sacred, we're not divine. At the same time,
that people are criminalized, especially the Black and Brown communities.
Yes, 1000%. At the same time, we're getting like deeper and deeper into this like language obsessive, like very 3D conversation about identity. And one of the things that the medicine has been speaking to me more and more, and the communities that I'm in have been speaking more and more, is to see the spirit of people. Because the reality is that not all skin folk are kinfolk, right? Just because somebody has the same whatever label as you doesn't mean that they're value aligned, that they're mission aligned, that they have your greatest good or the collective's greatest good in mind as they are moving through this world. And I think it's really important that we start to remember that and look for the people that resonate with our spirit and resonate with our soul, so that we can start to get to a place where it's not spiritual bypassing to recognize the spirit within the vessel and not necessarily what the vessel is telling us or signaling.
And yet the Ancestors Project has BIPOC integration circle. For folks who don't know what BIPOC is, Black, Indigenous, people of color. I know these acronyms, new ones are popping up all the time. We're just trying to keep up too, so that we can reach our people. So
truth. And
so why that space?
Yeah. So it's interesting, that came about from early conversations that Dre and I had, where I was very like, I want to have medicine circles for Black women only. And, you know, in spending more time together, having greater conversations. Dre is my Ancestor Project. I call him my ancestral partner in this work. So we facilitate together, we teach together, we learn together. And he was very clear that ceremony is not the place to make these delineations. That if people are willing to come and get burned and put frog poison on their bodies and throw up in a bucket, that like they're here to do the work, and that we honor that. And then at the same time, he and I had both had a lot of experiences in our medicine path where we were the only or one of very few Black folks or people of color in this space, and had experienced spiritual bypassing, microaggressions, an inability, like a facilitator's inability to hold the nuance of identity-based trauma and how that shows up through the medicine. And so our like middle ground solution was to have integration circles that are only for BIPOC. And integration circles are a space to, we say, take your downloads and turn them into daily action. So how are you embodying the lessons of the medicine in your day-to-day life? How are you taking care of your physical, mental, spiritual, collective, and environmental health? And it has been really powerful to be able to talk about that in community. At the same time, we've definitely had people who show up that are like, it may be white passing or confused about where they're supposed to be circle-wise. And we don't like kick people out. We do very explicitly say, this is a space for BIPOC folks, please respect that. This is not like a common thing that comes up, but I also am not one to like, I'm not the BIPOC police and I'm not a gatekeeper. So it's like having to walk this line of honoring the experiences of people and why they show up to the space. And then hoping that people are able to respect the desired purpose of holding that container. We've definitely had people like show up and try and not turn their camera on, and you're like, I know who you are, and you're out. Like, we do have a rule that you have to have your camera on, like for safety purposes and community building, for at least the introductory part of the circle. So, you know, we take holding the community seriously, and we are not the BIPOC police gatekeepers. I think, yeah, it's really important to honor the sacrifice that people are willing to make when they step into medicine space and into vulnerable sharing spaces, while also protecting the community. So it's definitely a balance that we walk.
I'm right there with you. And then also it's like, how much protecting can we do until some people need to take self-accountability with their own healing, with their own triggers, while also being responsible, right? As the facilitator or the curator of the space. I'm right there with you. One thing that Dre said in one of the last workshops that I really loved was instead of saying shit, what is it? As you're on this path, how is it that you are like releasing people and places that no longer serve you? Because I hear that all the time too. And that just like created a contraction in my body.
Mm,
Every time I hear that, I'm like, I don't want to, like, I don't even want anybody to serve me to begin with. And his reframe was like, we're leaning into people and places that you're excited to attract. I'm like, yes, that's my people
mhm.
right there, right? Because I don't want to see people as disposable either.
Mm,
And I've been on this similar trajectory. I have run this coaching business now for 4 years, and it has just been a blessing that every single one of my group programs has been all people of color. I even have my challenges with using people of color, and now there's like people of the global majority. We're finding all of these alternatives. I understand the intention, and I think similar to you, the reason why we do have BIPOC only spaces is because when we do have conversations about race, I feel like the people that both you and I attract have already done a lot of that work, have intellectualized, have attempted to intellectualize their ways out of oppression. And then the moment that a white body comes into the space, many of us may feel like we need to censor ourselves, or then it becomes about them
mm,
and their own fragility versus like,
mm.
I just need to actually give myself a moment to feel grief and anger around this, and then also be in joy without, as we mentioned, spiritually bypassing.
Yeah. And I also like this. I feel like white folks are the most acculturated. Like there is this whole myth of whiteness, like it's a thing that even exists, which was created so that enslavement could be justified. Because before the mid 1700s, it was like Dutch people, German people, English people, right? It was like these groups that had, and before that it was the Saxons, the Celts, the Nordic, the Slavic. Like there was all these ethnic traditions in Europe, in present day Europe, that got colonized before colonization got exported to the rest of the world. And so I think this also goes back into like seeing the spirit of people. White folks absolutely need to do that ancestral like lineage, understanding where they come from and what traditions may have been practiced there. And I think that that adds to the richness of the healing space. It doesn't take away from it. But it also recognizes that like we've all been colonized. It's just for some of us, it's like closer in history than it is for others. And for some of us, it's still impacting the structures and the systems that oppress us. Um, so yeah, that's always like a framing that I try to bring to these conversations around decolonization and liberation work is like we're all colonized and we all have traditions to remember and come back to.
Right. And yeah, I remember having one of these conversations in our program as well when it came to holding space for that guilt and that shame, which both you and I have a background in community organizing, social justice. And I feel like what I was taught, what I was initiated into, like cancel culture, for example, was ensuring that people felt that anger, that guilt, and that shame, and yet there was a lack of resourcing when it came to how is it that we can move beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's where sacred earth medicine really helped to open up my heart in ways that my college courses and textbooks couldn't take me.
Yeah.
And so actually curious to hear about your role within harm reduction. I'm assuming
Mm.
working within the nonprofit industrial complex into completely walking away and creating this current legacy.
Mm. Yeah, so my background is in opioid use, harm reduction, and overdose prevention. So I live in Piscataway Lumbee territory, which is present day Baltimore City. And for years, worked with the needle exchange, like mobile needle exchange program, and then training in overdose prevention, like giving trainings in overdose prevention. So like how to administer Narcan and things like that. Then I moved to Bolivia for a year where I attempted to do a like social entrepreneurship project, which came with a lot of immense lessons. And when I came back to Baltimore, I worked in the nonprofit world still for a little bit. And then, yeah, got to this place where I was just very disillusioned with the nonprofit world, with like lying on grants about the depth of the impact that was made, the trajectory, the trajectory of the students that we worked with, and like how much better off they were. Nonprofits usually have like 2 or 3 kids, especially if it's working with education and children, like a couple like stars that they sort of like tout around town as a litmus test for their success, when like really behind closed doors it's a shit show. So I did that for a little bit, and then ended up working for a startup in the like ed tech world. And during that time, yeah, my medicine path got much more intentional, and then the pandemic started, and I just didn't have the patience for the BS anymore. And at the same time, I still wouldn't like rip the band-aid off. So I started working, met Dre, sat in some combo ceremonies, like had the clarity, the messaging from the medicine, from psilocybin as well, that like, coming back to my purpose essentially, and just slowly started not doing my job until I got fired, which I was like, thank you guys for firing me. When they called me, they were like, oh, we need to speak with you on Zoom right now. And they're like, so we're going to be letting you go. And I was like, cool, thank you. Their faces.
Wow.
It was great. And when we started in the Ancestor Project, we very intentionally chose not to be a nonprofit. So a lot of people think that we're a nonprofit. We're not, because of my experiences for many years in the nonprofit industrial complex and the lack of impact in that space. And lack of impact because largely they, especially for Black and Brown led or Indigenous led nonprofits, like you have to become some type of community martyr in your service. And I think I carried that energy into the starting of the Ancestor Project a little bit. For the first, like, I like did my healing work, and I was like, great, I'm like at this place now to build out this collective, this community. And then maybe a year into it, was like, oh, I think I just did the same thing I was doing before, where I like self forgot for the collective. It just felt different because like I love this collective and these are my people and this is my purpose. So it's been like an interesting road to come back to that balance of like doing community-based work, being focused on collective liberation, and remembering that that cannot happen without our it's been an interesting journey over the last 3 years. We really started in like February of 2020. is
Wow.
when we like really, yeah, it's been, and that's the other thing, it's been this like really wild, like ancestral
Yeah.
comet that just like, once you start saying, I mean, you said this too, right? Like you signed up for, you did a combo ceremony, you signed up for liberation training, and then it was like all these pieces just started to like fall into place. And it's super exciting when you start to say yes to spirit, and when you start allowing those people and places and new habits and new behaviors and new narratives to come into your life. And you still have to like have the discernment of, you know, coming back to self and taking the time to slow down and not rush through it. I just wanted to like circle back and touch on what you said about that question of like, what are you releasing? Like so frequently in the healing space, it's like, what are you letting go of, and letting go and letting go and letting go. And we really want to focus not on just like voiding the self out, but like, what are you re-nourishing yourself with? Like, what are you releasing that doesn't serve you, but what are you welcoming in that you're excited about? Because otherwise you get into this, you can easily fall into this trap of the wellness space, the psychedelic space, whatever it is, of instead of like integrating your parts, it's like trying to get rid of parts of yourself. And that ultimately doesn't really serve anyone, to just be constantly voiding the spirit out.
Yeah, it's like how much dismantling can we do until everything is finally dismantled? What is going to come in place of that? And then how is it that we are actively playing a role versus I've talked about the drama triangle in the past. You know, you have the victim, the villain, and the martyr. And so then it's like we're constantly looking for a rescue outside of ourselves. And
Yes.
I think it's just so funny how many of us end up on this path because yeah, like you, I was fired, but I like to say freed now. And
Yeah.
and um and had I not been freed, I would probably still be stuck in the same place, taking on other people's traumas and stories and just becoming so dissociated and apathetic towards the pain and suffering of the world. Or allowing it to consume me to where I just don't see what's ahead of me. It's and oh, it's just so beautiful how medicine leads us to these kinds of relationships where we are on this path of remembrance. And yeah, so much of my nonprofit journey experience mirrors a lot of what you've been through, and I'm sure what a lot of our listeners have been through, to where in order for us to actually get money, we have to talk about the trauma, we have to talk about the pain, and then our progress becomes quantified when really it's just it's bullshit in order to get, let's just be real, that white money. Who is behind a lot of this funding, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that I want to
Yeah.
entirely reject that. It's the fact that in order for us to actually gain access to those resources, that we have to perpetuate the narrative of trauma and of oppression for their approval.
Yeah. Yeah. We did a post because we're not a nonprofit. So we have a mutual ceremony fund that we are able to take sponsorships for because we're not a nonprofit. But a lot of people were like, oh yeah, you know, I want to be able to donate to you, but I can't get a tax write-off for it. And it's like, well, if your donation depends on a tax write-off, then like you should probably be reevaluating your donations, right? And that there's this there's also like a trendiness and a quota now that organizations that give, or companies that give money, want to be able to say like, oh well, I gave it to these BIPOC people, or I gave it to this Black organization, or whatever, and it like helps them maintain the facade of being like aware of the ways that they perpetuate oppression. It's like, oh, I just gave some money to these people, so like clearly I'm an ally. And I think that like really takes away from the nuance of the work, and thinking about how we can reframe that language. And I think this ties back to this, like, how are these identity labels actually serving us, right? And even the psychedelic liberation training was, in its first iteration, a 4-part class that was called the Psychedelic Anti-Racism series. Then I started calling it the Psychedelic Anti-Oppression training. And then I was like, first off, for me, it's exhausting to stay in that state of like fight with it. It's not sustainable to the work. And as you said, like, if we're constantly, I mean, you know, I'm a fan of like the terms of dismantling and decolonization, and all of that is important, but it's also like, what are we creating to get to? And I think that's where the liberation piece comes in, is like starting to envision what we could create together when we each take responsibility for our own dismantling, right? And like our own questioning of the constructs that we carry and we uphold. And so I've been trying to, in my own space as well, like shift my language from the dismantling, from the anti, into like the expansive state of liberation.
Yeah, because words cast spells, and I feel like those of us who are choosing this pathway from more of that narrative of oppression and dismantling and decolonization into a more expansive one of like liberation, right? And remembrance, we've had to go through this sort of initiation, similar to you, after my work in nonprofit, got into transformative justice work, only to realize, okay, we're talking about wanting to transform our communities, but not many of us are actually willing to sit with the discomfort of transforming ourselves. My whole first year in entrepreneurship, it felt like I was back at the Rape Crisis Hotline Center, because I didn't realize that my mindset was still of that of the martyr and of the savior, wanting to help everybody, only then to attract people that were not ready to meet me at least halfway. And so then I had to assess, what are the words that I'm casting, the spells that I'm casting that is attracting this, and how is it that not only my language but my frequency needs to shift in order to call forth other BIPOC, or quote unquote BIPOC, or even white bodies, allies, spirit kinfolk that are invested in this world beyond oppression, yet also understand what it is that led us here.
Yes, yeah, 1,000%. That's the trick of it, right? Is like, yeah, getting to a place where you can like see what it is that we could get to when we move out of these boxes that we create for ourselves, and honoring how we got here and what it will take to come out of it. Last night we have a retreat next week, a combo retreat actually, and we did our group prep call so that people could start to like see each other, see all the facilitators that would be in the space, share intentions, and just like begin that community building, begin building trust with each other. And one of the questions that we always ask on our intake form before ceremony is, what is our role, meaning me and Dre's role, in your healing and transformation process? Because sometimes people will come to this space, not typically people who come to us, because we're pretty clear about what I'm about to share, but people will come and like gurufy or put the quote unquote healer on a pedestal, as in like, I'm going to heal you, which is wildly inaccurate. And so last night we had this really beautiful conversation about like, we're there to support you with love and care. We're there to bridge and be like, you know, we have this smidge more knowledge about this one modality, right? So we'll be the bridge to connect you to that, but we're connecting you to your inner healer, and you are responsible for what you bring into this space, and you're responsible for what you carry out of this space as well. Like, everyone has a capacity to be and has to step into this role of being your own healer. And you mentioned about this, the triangle of like the victim, the villain, and the martyr. I think a lot of us, especially
the victim, the villain, and the victor.
The villain, the victor, and the villain, the victor, and the what you said, what she has said. You know, and like, but staying in that victim mentality, right? And like waiting for the savior and waiting for someone else to come and fix it. And the reality is like no one's coming. You have to support yourself. And if you are beginning to step into this path of sacred earth medicine, like your ass is about to get triggered all up and down and through the place. And you're about to see a whole bunch of fears. And those are your teachers. And it's great. I love you, like rubbing it. That's how I feel like, so I'm like, ooh,
bring it on.
I'm throwing up in a bucket and find your shadow.
Bring on the triggers. All right, man. I thought I was healed. Why is this bothering me? All right, let's go.
What's this over here? And I think some people are like, yeah, I'm ready for that. And then they come face to face for it. And then they're like, this is your fault that you put me here. And you brought this up and you blah, blah, blah. Baby girl, you brought yourself. Or baby human, you brought yourself, right? Like, or really your ancestors brought you. Like, this is where you're supposed to be, but you do have to be willing to take the responsibility for whatever lightness, darkness, etc. is going to come up and come through the medicine. And we frequently say, you were talking about like challenging experiences. I do think that there's Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say for context, and this is one of the things I definitely learned from y'all, is that there's no such thing as a good or a bad journey. There's only difficult experiences.
Right. You have challenging experiences, but the medicine will always bring you what you need, which is not necessarily what you want, but is what you need. And one of the challenges I have, we were talking also earlier about, like, you know, I just came back from a very intense 10 days in the jungle. I have a lot of like cool, crazy stories and like visions and dreams that I had that I could sensationalize and share as a means of like building clout or getting attention or whatever. But I think what's more helpful is like sharing the insights the medicine brings and then being the example of that in your day-to-day life. Because what happens is that people come into medicine space with expectations of what's going to happen. And then when that doesn't happen, it's like, oh, I had a bad experience, or like I didn't get what I wanted, or blah, blah, blah. But it's like you always get what you need, even if it's not super pretty.
Oh gosh, one of my last journeys, I literally felt like spirit was like, fuck your intentions.
That's cute. You came with intentions. We're gonna do this thing over here.
Right. And I was like, oh. But then I was comparing it to my other earlier journeys where I feel like I got downloads to how my ancestors built the temples. And one of my most profound journeys wasn't even when I saw visions. It was just a clear message from my ancestors that said, okay, you've been telling yourself this story that you need to heal for us. Why are you wasting your time? We're gone. Like, why are you carrying this suffering as if we passed it down to you? You have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
You have a choice to live in joy, to live in peace. And I was like, what, but who am I without this suffering?
Yeah, no, I similarly, and I think this is also, you were talking about like trying to intellectualize healing, right? Or intellectualize oppression. That I was like, okay, got 6 ceremonies in the jungle, so we're going to work on this thing, I'm going to look at this thing, I'm going to work on this, and then I got to look at this, and I'm going to heal that thing and look at that wound, and we're going to be good. And
come with a set of checklist. Come with a set of checklists like, for the spirit guides.
I would like to, yeah. Could we please move through this? Thank you. And some of the things just happened naturally, right? Without it being like, we're going to spend a night looking at this. It was like the progression of what happened led me to healing X thing. And also I went in with this, like, I need to like heal my relationship to the masculine and my father and this wound and blah, 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 blah. And we were in a tobacco ceremony, and it was just like joyful, and a heart appeared in the puro. And it was really just like or you could stop trying to constantly dig this shit back up and maybe just like enjoy that in this present moment, that relationship is really beautiful and like easeful and doesn't need to be constantly like, where did I store the trauma from that? And blah, 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 blah. Like, you're good. It's good. You are in a really beautiful relationship with the masculine right now. Let's leave it at that. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right, you know, and there's just still some little part of my mind that was like, but do we need to look at it again? I was like, no, just stop. Stop doing that. And what you're saying, like people bring like last little pieces, like constantly we're talking about like intergenerational trauma, epigenetic trauma, where trauma is stored in the body, which is really important. And also like, what are the ancestral gifts? What are the joys? Like, have you ever seen that meme that's like ancestral mathematics? That for there to have been 12 generations, you have like 4,000 or 8,000 12th great grandparents. And I'm pretty sure that like those 4,000 people were not just constantly suffering. Like, yes, it was challenging, but like there was joyful moments and they had gifts also that we could be reclaiming. And I think this is, you know, loops nicely into the conversation about the nonprofit industrial complex and how we maintain these stories and stay in this narrative of what it means to be BIPOC, to be queer, to be whatever the identifier is. And I'm excited for us to be getting to a place of seeing our own spirit beyond those labels and being able to then reflect and mirror and see that in others.
I'm just a ball of light that ended up in this brown body, and now I'm just figuring out how to navigate the world with it. Yeah, like I have a clear set of deliverables of what I need to get healing on so that I can advocate for earth medicine in my community. Yeah, so with that being said, for people who are just beginning their journey, or maybe similar to you, their pathway, their entry point into sacred earth medicine has been through the festival culture, and now they're wanting to build a more intentional relationship with it. How is it that folks can shift into actually using this as ceremony? And so one of the things that we mentioned is beginning with intention, right? Even though earth medicine guides, spirit might be like, yeah, no.
Your intention. But it's good to have one as a guiding post, and as like a point to come back to in your preparation as well. And just bringing intention to the process in general, right? So for me, it was about bringing it into a ceremonial context, creating a ritual for myself, experiencing the rituals that others have carried through time or have created in this lifetime. Set and setting is really important. So like, where's your mindset at, but also where are you partaking in the medicine? Who is going to be around you at that time? What are the agreements that have been made within that group of people if you're doing it with others? And I think it's also just about like the daily practices. For me, that is, I call it CCP, cleansing, centering, and protection. So like, how are you keeping yourself clean? Like, what is your physical, but also your spiritual and your emotional hygiene? What tools do you have to support you in keeping yourself clean? And then what are the practices to come back home to yourself, to center yourself? And how are you protecting yourself as you move through the world from the, you know, chaotic energies that are around, the chaotic narratives that are around? What are the other pieces? I think giving time for preparation is super important. So thinking about like what you're nourishing yourself with prior to sitting with the medicine. And then really like the integration is so important for that intentionality, right? So not just like jumping from one journey to the next, especially you'll see folks out here who are like, oh, I'm just trying to get up to that X dosage, right? So they're just like pushing themselves to take more medicine, which is a super American thing. like not even Western, not even like American and European, like it's a very American thing to be like, I'm gonna take more medicine and more medicine. Like it's this aggressive healing path that I don't really get. But yeah, like how are you taking time to embody those insights, and how are you taking time to shift your habits and your behaviors and the stories that you tell yourself, and then listening, like how are you listening to what the medicine is calling for you to do, or calling for when you should come back. And for me, it's also been like building that relationship, consistent relationship with ancestors, with your altar, which I'm sitting in front of, and coming back to your altar as a place that you worship yourself and you worship your guides and your ancestors as well. So yeah, I mean, I spent like the first 6 years of my path, so like the first half of my path, in celebratory or social use. And a lot of that was spent dancing, which was an amazing somatic release. I didn't have that language then, but now that I'm able to integrate, I can see how supportive that was for me coming into a path of radical love and acceptance. And so I think that too, like giving space to integrate, what may have seemed like just a fun exploration into psychedelics, like what was learned in that time as well, and how can you honor that as part of a new, more intentional approach to your path. Also, I'll just plug a resource real quick. We have this guide on our site called the Surrender Guide, and it is a guide to create ceremony for yourself. So I definitely don't encourage using it as a way to like try and step into some facilitator or sitter role for someone else, but that it can be used. It includes a recording of our prayer that we say before all of our ceremonies. It has a meditation with some breath work in it. There's a journey playlist in there. So, seeking out supportive resources as well, and supportive teachers that can really usher you through the beginnings of your intentional medicine path, I think is super important as well.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and link that in the show notes. I have like one more question on this topic that I feel a lot of people may be asking, which is who gets to be the gatekeeper of earth medicine? Because we do see non-Indigenous people, right, holding ceremony. You have ayahuasca ceremonies popping up everywhere, more combo ceremonies, more and more people who are getting initiated into circle keepers. And I'm here in Los Angeles, and so what I see a lot of is these plant medicine ceremonies that are facilitated by and it doesn't even have to just be white bodies, like it's even like melanated folks, right? Whoever it is, right? We're learning to see the spirit within each person, but they are catering to a certain population, which tends to be those who like more the 1%ers, right? And that's why I love the Ancestor Project so much, because of the advocacy for more of us to know that there's a place for us in this movement. But yeah, what would you say to somebody who's questioning, who maybe wants to step into the role of space holder and facilitator, but they are afraid of cultural appropriation? Or maybe they are engaged in it and they don't know it.
Yeah. So this is a challenging question, right? Because I think it connects back into this history of colonization that we've all been victim to. And also in this, like, can you take the time to do some ancestral research and find out what are the medicines that your people carried. I feel slightly conflicted about this question for a few reasons. So just came back from the jungle, working with medicine within a communal context where the taitas, or I guess shamans you would say, literally start drinking medicine when they are 8 years old. Like they start drinking ayahuasca, they call it yahe, when they are 8 years old. And even at age 30, they're not in ceremony singing. They're not leading ceremony. It is like the 60, 70 plus year olds who are leading the ceremony. And that is beautiful. And I think in our current context, there's like I don't want to say that there's urgency, but there is urgency, right? Like I'm already 20 years behind. And that's 20 years that I'm not going to get back. I have not been taking medicine since I was 8 years old. So it's like, how do we honor the traditions and the places that the medicine comes from, while also recognizing that we might not have 50 years before getting to a place of needing to support community or wanting to support community. I do think training is really, really important. It's been diluted by capitalism, right? Where it's like, you did this class, and now that means that you have a piece of paper that says that you can lead these ceremonies. That's also bullshit. But credentialing like is something that happens within a communal and indigenous context, that you do have to like pay your dues and do your work and before you get to step into this role. So that's not like a clear response about cultural appropriation. That's like a whole other like very long conversation.
Yeah. Part two.
Part two, what I feel like is really important, and another resource I'll share that we have on our site, which is completely free to download, is questions that I, as a participant, could be asking to a facilitator to ensure that they have been properly prepped and trained to support, I'll call them modern journeyers. So the reality is we don't live in integrated communities. We have a lot of like stories around pathology and diagnoses and the things that come with living in contemporary society that can come up through the medicine in ways that they might not come up in a indigenous context, like in a communal context. So I think it's helpful to have like some language and understanding around the transpersonal, around psychology and things like that, while also having deep connection with elders and with lineage. So I feel like it's one of the ways that we can resist cultural appropriation is one, through our own ancestral healing and ancestral work, but also like through discernment. And I think this is where this ties into that conversation we were having about the responsibility that each person needs to have to be their own healer, is that like, if you are going to sit in ceremony with someone, if you're going to allow somebody to hold space for you, that there are certain questions that you can ask to ensure that that person is doing it in integrity and authentically, and with your greatest physical, mental, spiritual, collective, and environmental health in mind. So I'll make sure to share that link with you as well, and people can download those questions for free so that you can, really like center in your own discernment.
Thank you. And for our listeners who are feeling so activated by our conversation, or who have more questions themselves, this is exactly why the Ancestors Project was created. I'm obviously not the expert, and I'm sure Charlotte can agree with me. Like who gets to claim themselves as an expert anyways? Well,
right. I'm not an expert either. Like, who am I to say like, this is who can practice and this is who cannot practice? Right. But like the way that we collectively, not even gatekeep, but like protect ourselves collectively, is by understanding like what questions to ask to keep our community safe. Because we're all babies on this path.
We're all babies, right? And this lifetime is just, it's just a little blip. And so if this is resonating with you, this is exactly why you can look at the free resources that Charlotte and Dre have created, which we can link in the show notes. And then if you're feeling called to go even deeper, the Psychedelic Liberation Training Program, I know that you have other opportunities for people to deepen this path. Can you share a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned it earlier, we have a couple integration circles that are free. We also have a practitioner learning community where we have monthly meetings and talk about ethics and best practice and things like that. And then pretty much every month we have some type of educational offering. So it might be a master class that we teach, or a series that community members and our teachers come in and teach as well. So those are all options. And then ceremony. So if you're interested in sitting in combo ceremony, we're also working on putting together our first international retreat so that we can start more openly offering some of the other medicines that we work with but can't be very loud about. So yeah, please just visit our site, is theancestorproject.com. We're on social as the Ancestor Project. And yeah, come and join us for a medicine circle or an integration circle.
Yes. So now that you're back from this experience, how is it that you are integrating? What is it that you are doing to stay grounded in this dimension?
Yeah. So staying in strong connection with my body, with movement is big for me. Coming to my altar each day to really center myself and find clarity and focus for the day. And then some like basic things, like I'm gonna get a pedicure and a manicure to like love up on myself. And I went to the float tank. That's one of my favorite integrations, is being in a sensory deprivation tank. Did some yoga and just like nurturing myself. One of the big things for me is I've been smoking cannabis since I was 14 and pretty much daily since I was 18. And I've just been getting a lot of messaging that it's time to like shift that relationship, that there's a lot waiting for me in the dream world that I am not able to access because of my relationship with cannabis. So I'm actually being really kind to myself because I'm not smoking. So yesterday I was like really getting on myself about like, well, you're not reading and doing this thing and doing the other thing and doing that. And I was like, yeah, and I'm also not smoking, which I haven't done for the last 12 years of my life. So yeah, for me right now in my path, that's a big piece of it, is like shifting my relationship with cannabis. So that's where I've been trying to like not hyper focus, but keep my energy in like, how am I keeping myself my system calm while I don't have cannabis to do that for me. Yeah.
And on that note, my last question, which is my ultimate favorite one, with everything it is you are moving through in this moment, transporting yourself into futurescape, what is time anyways, but looking back on who you are today and speaking to yourself as a future ancestor, what words of wisdom would come through?
Think less, be more, and be proud of yourself.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for joining us for this beautiful conversation. The Ancestors Project, y'all
Yeah.
check them out, and to be continued. So grateful
Yeah.
to have crossed paths with you this lifetime, and to many more to come. Unless this is going to be the
Yes.
last one, then that's cool too. I'll see you in the other dimension.
Yeah, exactly. I'll find your energy point and we'll bump energies. That sounded weird. Thank you for having me. Yeah, this was a joy, and it was really a joy to have you in class too. Like, thank you for all of your contributions to calling more medicine into this realm.
Look, my medicine right now is just joy and looking for more people to amplify that. So thank you, Mycelium
Ashe.
Network, for these connections.
Ashe.